Welcome home to Passionate Justice 168 for the week of 11 March 2017. I am Jonathan Wolfman, could not be anyone else. Thanks so much for being with us this week on our Salon Radio, where we invite you to read with us, write with us, and of course, as I tell you each week, while you're not required to write if you're more comfy reading and commenting on other people's offerings, that's just fine, but I do think you will want to write the longer you stay with us. You may join the Our Salon readers and writers community. How many of us? Well over 1,100 superb writers, keen readers, incisive commenters, personal essay, memoir, poetry, political, social justice commentary, where www.oursalon.ning.com. I want you to join us. Membership, as with all the best of life, is free. And now, Passionate Justice may also be heard Monday night, 7 p.m. Pacific on APRI, Alternative Public Radio International. And I want you to dig this. You may hear all of Our Salon's programs, each of the podcasts. Listen at your leisure by going to www.oursalon.ning.com/new episodes. That's one word, new episodes. And I ask you, as I do each week, I'd like you to watch on Netflix the award-winning film OC87. It is a brilliant personal journey and triumph, living with mental illness, directed by Bud Clayman, a friend of our program. It's an award-winning film, not only here, but in Europe as well. If you were to write a review of the film, yes, I would air it. And again, I feel the need to open by saying I do become concerned when my fellow progressives analyze fascists' moves to a point of harm, where what matters are their takes on each separate, deliberately steamrolled insult to democracy, so that by the time they fashion pithily refined version, umpteen wasting thought, wasting energy, not subverting the illegitimacy itself, in too many instances expecting applause for it all, they look up, surprised that detention wire and prison bars do not clap. And yes, I remind you that every Jew in America with any reading and sense has asked inwardly what might be a signal moment for leaving or for making resistance more than rhetorically political. Every American Jew, particularly those not raised in homes with refugee elders, each of us has tried to fathom what they saw precisely, what they heard precisely, what toxic broth whiffed, and what they did not see, and what they did not hear, those who left Western Europe 80 and more years back, and what compelled those who chose to stay to become part of an underground. The Jewish centers and cemeteries continue to be abused, shot at, harmed. So far, centers in at least 150 cities, including St. Paul, Buffalo, Houston, Cleveland, Nashville, Albuquerque, Chicago, Tampa, many more have received bomb threats, and the FBI still does not apparently know of any overall coordination, and this brings the total, as I say, to well over 150. Since when? Since the beginning of this 2017 calendar year, and this includes attacks at schools. This is a post-election surge, having become even more vile and more insistent since 2017. This is unprecedented, says the Southern Poverty Law Center, in religiously based hate threats and incidents in which those committed against Jews have in fact here in the United States always been at the top. Since the vote, threats such as these have shut Jewish community centers in scores of states and in Canada. You see, the question is what we hear, what we do not hear. The president gives, at best, lip service to the, oh, yes, they've told me it's wrong, so it's wrong. Yeah, I would like to think that my brother, my sister, and I, and our adult children would see aright, would hear with wisdom, will act when necessary, and with strength. What did our ancestors see? What did they hear? How did they know? What was their signal moment for action? As of now, I am staying and I am writing and I am broadcasting. Now, regarding last week's lunatic series of tweets by the President of the United States about the former President of the United States having wiretapped the current president, well, you see, you've got just three choices. That's it. Either A, as he was about to leave his presidency and contrary to his 8 years modus operandi, Mr. Obama knowingly arrogated to himself a right to break federal law, wiretapping Mr. Trump and his New York City residence. Or you can choose B. Some law enforcement agency argued to a FISA court persuasively with clear evidence that a person or a group in Mr. Trump's residence and or corporate offices were, as Charles Blow mentions in the New York Times, they were engaged in illegal behavior involving Russia and or other nations or individuals. Or you may choose C. This is simply further knee-jerk, self-pity, conspiratorial, far-right, radio-originated dangerous nonsense issued to deflect the developing Trump-Putin narrative. If your choice is A, you must offer verifiable, credible evidence. If your choice is B, you must explain why Mr. Trump would make the charge when a bright 12-year-old knows that that would simply invite more presumably unwanted scrutiny. And if you choose C, you must ask yourself if you think the natural debates attendant to any presidency, healthcare, immigration, court vacancies, on and on, should move forward as if we're living with anything like untraditional administration. Or as Mr. Charles Blow says in the Times, we must demand some kind of a pause until these national existential questions are resolved. You must choose. And now, to explain further why you must choose, I want to share the greater part of a Robert Reich essay. He is the contributor, chancellor, professor of public policy at the University of California at Berkeley. He's the author of Saving Capitalism for the Many, Not the Few. He writes 3 terrifying reasons for Trump's latest rant. No president may order a wiretap on his own. Early Saturday morning, 4th of March, the 45th president alleged in a series of tweets that former President Barack Obama orchestrated a Nixon Watergate quote-unquote plot to tap Trump's phones at his Trump Tower headquarters last fall in the run-up to the election. Trump concluded that the former president is a bad or sick guy, another quote. Well, Sunday morning, Mr. Trump called for a congressional investigation. Trump cited, of course, no evidence for his accusation. He wants people, the Congress of the United States, to investigate a situation made up of whole cloth, thin air, fluffer nutter. Folks, we've got a huge problem on our hands. Mr. Reich says, either one, Trump is more nuts than we had suspected, a truly delusional paranoid. Trump's outburst was triggered by commentary in the alt-right Breitbart News on Friday, which had reported, you see, an assertion made Thursday by right-wing talk radio host Mark Levin, suggesting Obama and his administration used police state tactics last fall to monitor the Trump team's dealings with Russian operatives. If this was the case, we've got a president willing to put the prestige and power of his office behind baseless claims emanating from well-known right-wing purveyors, of lies. Which means Trump shouldn't be anywhere near the nuclear codes that could obliterate the planet, or near anything else that could determine the fate of America or the world. 2. The second possibility is that Trump is correct, and the Obama administration did in fact tap his phones. But understand this, people, if this was the case, before the tap could have occurred, it is highly likely that Mr. Trump and or those very close to him committed a very serious crime, including treason. Why is that? Because no president can order a federal wiretap on his own. For federal agents to obtain a wiretap on Mr. Trump or on you, on Miss Piggy or anyone else, the Justice Department would first have had to convince a federal judge that it had gathered sufficient evidence of probable cause, that they would have had probable cause to believe that Mr. Trump had committed a serious crime, or that Mr. Trump was an agent of a foreign power, depending on whether it was a criminal or foreign intelligence wiretap, in which case we have someone in the White House who shouldn't be making decisions that could endanger America or the planet. 3. The third possible explanation for Trump's rant is that he's trying to divert public attention from the Jeff Sessions imbroglio and multiple investigations of Trump associates already found to have been in contact with Russian agents during the election when Russian operatives interfered with the election on Trump's behalf. Our intelligence agencies say that at least of that there is no doubt whatever. Maybe he's trying to build a case that the entire Russian story is a plot concocted by the Obama admin, along with the intelligence agencies and the mainstream press to bring Trump down. This way he can inoculate himself against the more damaging evidence that may come. But if it's all a big show to divert attention and undermine the credibility of the intelligence agencies and the press, well, what does that mean? It means, people, that Trump is willing to do anything to keep his job, even if that means destroying our own intelligence agency's reputation, if not our democracy itself. So there you've got it. Whatever the reason for Mr. Trump's rant last Saturday morning, America's in deep trouble. We've got a man at the top who's either a dangerous paranoid who's making judgments based on right-wing crackpots, and has in all likelihood committed treason or is willing to sacrifice the public trust in our basic institutions, including our intelligence services, to further his selfish goals. Each of these possible reasons is as terrifying as the other. There is no really good choice here, friends. For Democrats, to be the only ones sounding the alarm risks turning it into a new form of partisanship, further dividing the country along party lines. For Obama himself to respond would only dignify it. So the responsibility does, in fact, in this case, some Republican leaders have to speak out. Some have. Mr. McCain has. Some others have. This is dangerous demagoguery, people. Republican former presidents such as George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and former Republican senators and members of Congress and current ones have got to stand up to try to stop this ongoing outrage. This is a crisis of governance. If allowed to continue, this country is on a rolling crisis, and I don't see an end in sight. Friends, here is a note from the American Civil Liberties Union, an organization I've supported all my adult life. The ACLU has launched a grassroots mobilization platform that you can avail yourself of daily, and it will offer, based on your zip code, event information, strategies, specific resistance tools, and of course, yes, it's also an opportunity for the American Civil Liberties Union to fundraise, although no donation is required to get this platform's information. Still, it does look to be valuable to those who wish to add action where you live. Action where you live. Add that to your words. Go to ACLU Grassroots Mobilization Platform. Google that. ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union Grassroots Mobilization Platform. We have not availed ourselves of one of the more important and fascinating magazines that I know I've ever read, the New York Review of Books. We have not yet availed ourselves of it on Passionate Justice, but writer Mark Danner in the New York Review of Books recently posted a piece that I want to share with you now because I think it is so important. He begins with a Stephen Bannon quotation. What we are witnessing now is the birth of a new political order, and the more frantic a handful of media elites become, the more powerful that new political order becomes. Another way of saying it, the way I might say it, people, is Mark Danner is right. We are at the rebirth of a nation, perhaps, and we must take note. Danner says this: standing beneath the dais on Inauguration Day, squeezed uncomfortably between the Washington establishment gathered at the west front of the Capitol and Trump's hooting supporters on the lawn below. Lock her up, they chanted when Hillary Clinton was introduced. I marveled that the rain that had threatened for hours chose to fall at the precise second the newly sworn president opened his mouth to speak. It seemed a grim joke, so obvious as to be in bad taste, bringing forth inevitable cliches of an age of Trump ushered in by weeping skies. I felt the water run down my face. All umbrellas had been confiscated. And yet it took only a few hours to learn I'd been mistaken. You know, I looked at the rain, the expansive new president told the black-tied attendees at the Liberty Ball that evening, which just never came. By the next day, he was telling CIA employees that God looked down and he said, "We're not going to let it rain on your speech." Soon he was raving about the sunshine. If it remains to be seen whether we are truly witnessing the birth of a new political order, as Stephen Bannon says, it is clear, a month into Trump's ascension, that we are all his prisoners, held fast in the projected drama of his mind. As the battle over that new political order is enacted on the national stage, we have all become the dragooned antagonists in the play. This is what it is to live in the realm of the big man. His drama perforce is ours. Relentless political struggle, permanent revolution, shattering of norms, scandal and controversy. The Capitol hip deep in broken crockery. This is what his supporters signed on for, and this is what he is determined to give them. Perhaps he knows how to give them little else. To him, they are everything, his base. This is a beautiful movement. They've never seen a movement like this in this country before. Well, they are his creation, permanent suppliers of the adulation and self-affirmation he craves. Now they cheer and hoot and scoff while their hero, saber in hand, slashes and hacks at his enemies among the hated status quo. The latter include not just Steve Bannon's handful of media elites, but many others who are appalled and outraged and find themselves forced to live under the pall of a permanent political anxiety that hangs over our nation's cities. It is our outrage, our disgust, our knee-jerk shock and condemnation that animate the play and give verisimilitude to the battle being fought. We are the enemy, and our screams of dismay are vital to the drama. Behind the controversies about crowd size and alternative facts and illegal voters and Muslim bans, all the shock and alarm and political fatigue can be reduced to a dawning, horrified recognition that President Truman is indeed not here. Neither is Roosevelt, neither is Kennedy. The president is Donald Trump. His uttering a 35-word oath of office did not magically make him into someone else. He's determined to change the office much more than the office could ever change him. How could anyone have doubted that President Trump would be Donald Trump plus great power and not Donald Trump plus great restraint? And that he would be determined to use that newfound power to begin to do pretty much what he told his base he was going to do, and a final irony, that his very determination to break crockery and spread chaos and disruption is a major obstacle standing between him and the new political order, whose birth his Svengali Bannon claims he will oversee. The necessity for continual disruption, constant outrage, maintaining an iron grip on the news cycle, and sheer winning without ever retreating means he has a grand proclivity for getting in his own way, stepping on his own dick in political parlance, and we need, not for the first time, to let ourselves be grateful for that. It has thus far proved to be the hated status quo's most important protection, not least because in very short order he has managed to produce a growing cadre of adversaries within the government itself. I mean, we've just talked about the security agencies, people that he's alienated. More important, Mark Danner says, Trump's aggressive and reckless sallies against the intelligence professionals have secured him powerful enemies within the national security apparatus who have increasingly been making use of their contacts in the elite press, particularly the Washington Post and the New York Times, to fight back and to undermine his new administration. This is an important of the so-called Russian scandals. It's an important part of it that the intelligence services, in the words of Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, seem to be at war with the new president, and that war has already claimed a high-level casualty. That is retired General Michael Flynn, the president's first national security advisor, who was fired after only 24 days in the job. Though Trump has railed against illegal leaks and declared that Flynn was treated very unfairly by the media, this side of the story, the bureaucratic war being waged against Trump from within the government, by its nature cannot be adequately told in the press itself because reporters, however much they resist acknowledging it, in effect are vital players. The storyline is obscured, one might say, by the storyteller's own shadows. 4 weeks of the Trump ascendancy have been an ongoing seminar on where norms end and laws begin, on how much of what we had relied on when it came to the president's conduct rested largely on a heretofore unquestioned foundation of centuries-old custom, that the president would express respect for the prerogatives of Congress and the judiciary, that he would acknowledge the country's need for an independent press, that he would generally tell the truth and hold in respect the public record. In little more than the time it took to recite the oath of office, much of this has been swept away. Donald Trump is a proud shatterer of these norms, and the louder the crash and splatter, the better. For to his supporters such norms are nostrums, antiquated excuses for the elite's own self-protection, and the wails of outrage and protest means their hero is doing what they sent him to Washington to do. The norms are gone, perhaps never to be fully restored, and we have advanced now to the laws. The dividing line is surprisingly murky, that the president would not use his office to promote his personal business, for example, depends not only on the so-called emoluments clause of the Constitution, but a good many subsidiary norms that Trump began shattering some time ago when he refused to release his tax returns during the campaign. His long-standing vow to release them once an audit was completed has been quietly abandoned. It seems plain now that in the near term the emoluments clause has in common with these norms that it requires political animation, that it has life only to the degree that those in power are willing to enliven it. Thus far, Republicans in Congress, still stunned to find themselves enjoying an undreamed of monopoly on power and struggling to craft a workable political program not based solely on resentment, have shown themselves uninterested in pressing Trump on his business entanglements and seem willing to stand by and let the presidency become a source of great wealth for Mr. Trump and his family. Thus do sacred cows perish not with a bellow, but with a whimper. Ours is famously said to be a government of laws, not of men, and yet we find in the age of Trump that the laws depend on men and women willing to step forward and press them, and that such are not to be found. in the dominant party in Congress. Republicans are too divided and too focused on the main chance to move to protect what suddenly appear to be abstract principles in an age when their party cannot muster a national popular vote majority. They find themselves unaccountably in full possession of two branches of government and face the task of mastering their divisions sufficiently to pass a political program that won't further doom them to the wilderness. This means adopting policies of opposition designed to cultivate and harvest resentment, such as repealing Obamacare, which provides health insurance to more than 20 million Americans while somehow shaping them into a positive program that they can present to constituents as having improved their lives. It's a daunting task, and thus far they show few signs of being up to it. You heard, people, now the Republican idea of what a replacement for Obamacare is. It's been rejected by the not remarkably radical American Medical Association, and yes, the rather conservative AARP, American Association for Retired Persons, among many, many other groups they had hoped would love it. Untroubled by norms, you see, President Trump required only 2 weeks to come face to face with laws in the form not of Congress, but of 3 judges of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Once again, banning Muslims was what he had promised his base he'd do. That the executive order itself was a legal mess in its drafting and in its execution stemmed both from the modus operandi that the Trump team has adopted, policies closely held, drafts jealously sheltered from the eyes of those even in the departments or agencies responsible for carrying them out, and perhaps from the desire of the president and his advisors to stage a fight with a major institutional force not yet recumbent before him, and that is, of course, the judiciary. They are not worshiping the man yet. Thus, the president's assertion of his unreviewable powers in the face of so-called judges, was not just absurd or ignorant, but a bit of bait, establishing the basis for blaming the judiciary for any terrorist attack that may come. On this, he tweeted indefatigably and repeatedly, "Just can't believe a judge would put our country in such peril," he said in his most explicit tweet. "If something happens, blame him and the court system. People pouring in, bad." And then, "I have instructed Homeland Security to check people coming into our country very carefully. The courts are making the job very difficult." People, of course, are not pouring in. Certainly not from the 7 countries targeted, or from the 6 countries targeted in his most recent mess of a proposal. But the phrase links once again the country's vital security to the complex of issues at the heart of Trump's America First politics: trade, immigration, and terrorism. Fortress America is being assailed by foreigners who pour into the country and take our jobs, by elite technocrats who he calls stupid people, who negotiate trade deals that leave our borders unprotected, by traitorous businessmen who move factories abroad, and by terrorists who take advantage of the non-existent immigration safeguards to penetrate our shores. Everywhere the other threatens, everywhere the stupid, ineffectual, corrupt, self-dealing elites do nothing to protect the forgotten American, in effect allying themselves with the threatening outsiders, becoming in reality, if not intent, traitors. As Trump proclaimed from the Capitol scarcely a month ago, this stops right here and right now. But now the, quote, so-called judges stand in the president's way. You see, the president will likely get his immigration ban in one form or another, by backing up, rewriting the executive order, and proclaiming victory. Commentators will bemoan the fiasco that his first immigration rollout became, but Trump will have established the precedent of saddling the judiciary with responsibility for the next attack. Jack Goldsmith, the former head of the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel under George W. Bush and now a professor at Harvard Law School, notes that, quote, Trump is setting the scene to blame judges after an attack that has any conceivable connection to immigration. If Trump loses in court, he credibly will say to the American people that he tried and failed to create tighter immigration controls. This will deflect blame for the attack, and it will also help Trump to enhance his power after the attack. After a bad terrorist attack at home, politicians are always under intense pressure to loosen legal constraints. This was even true for near misses, such as the failed underwear bomber, which caused the Obama administration to loosen constraints on its counterterrorism policies in numbers of ways. You see, courts feel these pressures, and those pressures will be significantly heightened, and any countervailing tendency to guard against executive overreaction diminished if courts are widely seen to be responsible for an actual terrorist attack. Think about that, friends. More broadly, the usual security panic after a bad attack will be enhanced quite a lot in courts and in Congress if before the attack legal and judicial constraints are seen to block safety. If Trump assumes that there will be a bad terrorist attack on his watch, blaming them now will deflect blame and enhance his power more than his usual after the next attack. Donald Trump has done this. He has set it up so that the judges will take the blame. And one might add that Trump's executive order and the presidential Twitter assault on judges, on the judiciary itself, that followed, have set up the judiciary to be blamed following any attack, not just one having any conceivable connection to immigration. In his followers' views, Trump has acted to protect the country, and political judges have blocked the president. He has put them in a position to take the fall, that is, the judges, our judiciary. Perhaps this was not the original plan, but with Trump it is safe to say there will likely never be an original plan that plays out to the end. As the hapless Jeb Bush observed, Trump was a chaos candidate and he'd be a chaos president. Better to say that Trump uses chaos as a vital element in his tactics. He uses chaos as a vital element in his tactics, perhaps having learned during his long career to capitalize on the chaos that his recklessness, his ignorance, and his aggression inevitably create. One might call the resulting tactics shock and opportunity. Trump uses chaos. You see, he uses chaos to shock his opponents into varying crouches of outrage and contempt, and then lunges forward amid the tumult wherever he sees an opportunity presenting itself. No wonder he thinks of himself as the supreme counterpuncher. His virtuosity is in that kind of opportunism. It is against this reality, friends, that we must see the likelihood of a crisis as the vital springboard of a Trump's presidency, especially in an increasingly unpopular and unstable one. The lower his poll numbers, the more outlandish his lies, the greater the resistance from opponents within the bureaucracies, the thicker his scandals and chaos, the more likely he'll be to seek to use a crisis and all the opportunities it offers to lever himself from a position of defensiveness to that of a dominating power. It is impossible to say when such a crisis might present itself or what it might be: a confrontation with Iran, a dust-up with China, A terrorist attack on American soil, there is simply no way of predicting, but it's worth taking very seriously that some sort of crisis will come, and that given Trump's past behavior, his ruthless opportunism, and his drumbeat emphasis on protecting the country, quote unquote, such a crisis might well serve as a turning point in a Trump presidency, particularly one that is increasingly under siege. Now consider the possibility, friends, of a terrorist attack on American soil, even a failed one. Not only would such an attack put Trump in a perfect position to strike out at the judiciary branch of our country, a major countervailing institution, it would offer him the political leverage to put down various rebellions within the bureaucracy, particularly within those intelligence agencies. There's no way to know whether such an attack will come, but one can say that Trump, by attempting to strike out at Muslims generally, has managed to place the Islamic State in the tempting position of being able to affirm, by attacking the United States, that it is the avenger of all Muslims. No accident that its propagandists have been nothing short of exultant, dubbing Trump's executive order the Blessed Order. That's right, people. That's how they refer to Trump's immigration order. The Blessed Order, according to ISIS. If, as the Islamic State has asserted, the goal of its attacks in the West has been to eliminate the gray zone, as they call it, to place Muslims in the West between one of two choices, to either apostatize or to migrate to the Islamic State and thereby escape persecution from the Crusader government, that's us, and citizens. And then Trump's immigration ban goes forward, accomplishing the same thing. Isolating Islamic communities, placing them all among a besieged minority whose travel is restricted and whose loyalty to their adopted countries is put into question. Already, several jihadist tweeters have asserted that the prophecy of the late Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born cleric killed in a drone strike in Yemen in 2011, that the West would, quote, eventually turn against its Muslim citizens. Well, now ISIS is saying that that's fulfilled. If one sought to design a policy to encourage radicalization, it would be hard to suggest a better one than Mr. Trump's policies. One needn't posit an administration master plan to note that a further attack, even an unsuccessful one, will find the political ground well prepared. The panic over security that follows will open the way to a variety of measures to, quote, protect the country, few or none of which might have been necessary to prevent the attack in the first place. And as we have seen, after an attack, politicians seize the opportunity to act, not least to deflect blame from themselves. And we can expect President Trump, after his repeated vows to keep the country safe, to act aggressively and comprehensively. How far might he go? Would depend on the severity of the attack, the ambitions of the administration, and perhaps how cornered Mr. Trump feels himself to be. What measures might we expect under a Trump state of emergency? Probably strong steps against refugees, aliens, and immigrants, suspending all entry of refugees, widespread deportations, expelling many green card holders, further tightening and even suspending immigration. Mosques might be placed under surveillance, the much discussed Muslim registry established more broadly, and again, depending on the severity of an attack, bulk collection of metadata might be reinstituted along with other forms of domestic surveillance. Long-standing constraints on the military and the CIA operating domestically might be loosened or eliminated. Black sites would be reestablished and torture reintroduced. The cells at Guantanamo, nearly empty now, would once again begin to fill. The standing post-September 11th authorization for the use of military force might be expanded or replaced, allowing unlimited military strikes abroad and even perhaps at home. The latter might lead, in the case of a particularly severe attack, to the suspension of habeas corpus. Certainly, if such an attack were to come during the current Congress, there is no reason to expect anything other than majority cooperation and support, not only for Trump's specific responses to the attack, but for the rest of the program, for the rest of his program in entirety. Democrats, whom Trump would denounce as worse than judges in their obstructionism, would be on the defensive, and the courts, whose pushback in any case would take much longer, as it did after September 11th, will have been politically hamstrung by a commander-in-chief who will be in a position to declare and to repeat that he had warned the political judges not to second-guess him in what was needed to protect the country, but that they had not listened. He will not be shy in saying the same about the press, which he already calls the most dishonest human beings on earth. By then, his political drama will have been elevated from a battle against elites and the status quo to a heroic struggle for the survival of a nation. As the hero was fond of telling his crowds during the campaign, if he lost, we won't even have a country anymore. There is little reason to suspect that they don't believe it still, and no reason to think that he does not. Never let a crisis go to waste, President Obama's first chief of staff was fond of saying. It is fair to expect that in the face of opportunities to increase his power, to destroy the opposition, and to build his new political order, President Donald Trump will once again gaze upon the darkening skies and see only sunshine. Thank you, Mark Danner and the New York Review of Books. People, you know that on 21 February, I first wrote that I asked what might be a signal moment for Jews either to leave the United States for safer harbor or to join a more than simply rhetorical group of resistance to this new regime. Now, the New York Times reporter Tamara Best wrote the other day about a new series of signals. She told us that since the new year, anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim white nationalist groups have ramped up recruiting, and recruiting is soaring on 70 campuses here in the United States, including Vanderbilt, Central Michigan, University of Southern California, Texas A&M, others, many others. Recruiting by groups such as Identity Evropa, American Vanguard, American Renaissance have coincided with anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim flyers, graffitis, and rallies. Nothing these groups have done to date violates law, save possibly the graffiti, nor should expression be illegal, or should it be suppressed. No, it should not. Still, it's noteworthy. This increased anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim campus activity and its potential acceptance and growth as normal, along with the now weekly bomb threats and vandalism directed at Jewish community institutions, raises the stakes for those of us needing to answer the question: moment for leaving, moment for more than rhetorical resistance. As I say, for now, I'm staying, writing, broadcasting. We have such a big job. I want your stories. Send them to me at jwolf41387 at AOL.com. I need you You need you to keep trying to live as if justice matters, as if what your children and what you do, it all matters. Be creative and courageous. Take your place on that great Mandela next to Bud Clayman and every one of our writers, and next to me. Why? This is our brief moment of time. Repair this crazy place. You can. The poet Phil Oakes taught we have to do it while we're here, and he could never have been more right. I promise you this, when you act on justice's behalf, it pays back, and it will most definitely make you happy. And I remind you, as I ask you to join us again next week, you may hear all of our salon's programs at your leisure. Where? www.oursalon.ning.com/new episodes. God bless this newborn Reich. Turn it into something better. You, don't wait for God. You must turn it into something better. I and you and I. So always remember, here and everywhere, it's passionate justice.